legally. Florida led the way in enacting strong policies to deter and discourage and hold accountable people that came to this country illegally. We are now coming up on the next presidential inauguration. And when President Trump takes office again on January 20th, we are going to see a sea change in policies, particularly with respect to the border and illegal immigration. And this is an issue that has been festering in this country for many, many decades. Although the first Trump administration was much more successful than others have been, this is the time to get it right once and for all. And so the state of Florida stands ready, willing, and able to be able to help facilitate these policies that will benefit Floridians and benefit the American people. We've been working with the transition team. I've been speaking with the president. We had the governors down at Mar-a-Lago. There's going to be some ambitious policy changes that are going to be instituted on day one, particularly with respect to illegal immigration and major executive orders that are going to unwind the bad policies of the Biden administration, but then also provide a level of empowerment for states and local governments to help facilitate the policies against illegal immigration. And so the question for the state of Florida is, we're not a sanctuary state. We banned sanctuary cities my first year as governor, but we have a responsibility to be in this fight. State and local officials in Florida must help the Trump administration enforce our nation's immigration laws. And we are going to need, in order to do that effectively, we are going to need legislation to impose additional duties on local officials and provide funding for those local officials. There also needs to be measures to hold people accountable who are violating our anti-sanctuary policies. And then Florida needs to make sure that we don't have any lingering incentives for people to come into our state illegally. So therefore, I'm going to call the legislature into special session starting the week of January 27th. We have the next president taking office January 20th. We anticipate executive orders to be issued immediately after the swearing in and the inaugural address. We're going to have some time to process to make sure we're doing what we need to do, but then we need to act, and we need to act quickly. We don't have time to waste. The American people spoke very clearly of all the issues out there, and there were a lot of very important issues. This issue of the border and illegal immigration was one of the top issues in the 2024 election, and has been one of the top issues that we've had in this country for many, many years. So it will require new legislation in Florida to ensure that the duties of both state and local officials are very clear, and that those duties require them to be assisting the federal government in this regard. Now, the state, we're going to do it because I'm going to order that the state does it. Local, I think you're going to have some different views on that. Now, we're not a sanctuary state. We ban sanctuary cities, but you got to have effective accountability to hold those folks accountable if they choose to go in a different direction. It will also require some funding. Not a lot of funding, but I have a lot of sheriffs out there that are chomping at the bit. They want to be able to help, and they just need a little bit of funding. So we have responsibility to provide that funding, and we're going to be calling upon the legislature to do that. And just think about it. This will help with the overall public safety. Yes, enforcing immigration law in and of itself is important, but if you think back to the hurricanes we just had, they had looters in Pinellas County. I think there was like 45 of them that were arrested over a period of time, and I think 40 of them were in this country illegally. And I'm just thinking to myself, how the hell is this happening here on the head of a natural disaster? You got people that come here without authorization, and they go out and try to loot the place. Give me a break. Those people need to be sent back immediately. So this will end up helping the overall situation, even apart from immigration. Now, the accountability is significant. If those duties are clear in law, I have the authority with respect to certain officials to suspend them from their office if they are neglecting their duties, and that's a authority that I have invoked when it's been appropriate in the past. We also need to make sure that we don't have incentives for people to come illegally. We enacted E-Verify. People said that couldn't happen. We really did probably the strongest legislation in the country in 2023. So I think Florida has really done a great job, with one lingering exception. So back in 2014, the legislature enacted and then the then governor signed legislation providing preferential tuition for illegal immigrants, in-state tuition. That is a benefit that you're rewarding somebody for being here illegally. So that in-state tuition, it's been on the books now for over a decade. We've tried to work with the legislature to get that repealed in the past. It's something that always seems to fall out of the bill as it gets. No more excuses on this. We need to remove all incentives to come to the state of Florida illegally, and that is one of them. So we have a responsibility to act, and we will. Now, the call that we will make will not be limited to illegal immigration. There are other pressing issues that the state of Florida is facing. I know we have a legislative session coming up in a couple months, but I don't think some of these can wait. So we will also be including in this call lingering hurricane relief. We had 2 major hurricanes hit this state within the last couple months, and there are issues with respect to agriculture relief. There are issues with respect to homeowners, things like My Safe Florida Home. We have people that are approved, they're on a waiting list, but the funding ran out. Well, why not provide them that grant so they can build back in a way that's going to be more resilient in the future, given that they're in those areas. So we're putting that in the call. And look, if you're not going to do any more relief, if the legislature doesn't want to do that, that's one thing. But if you're going to do it, why wait for the money to be available July 1st? Why not just get it out the door this month so that people can get the relief they need? We'll also be including in the call condominium relief. So there was a major issue in this state because of the tragedy of Surfside back in 2021. One of the worst moments in the state's history. We lost close to 100 people, devastated the community of Surfside and South Florida, and people wanted to do something, and I respect that. And we've had, even apart from Surfside, there were decades in Florida where these condos have been neglectful. There's no question about that. But one piece of legislation was just not going to be able to solve all the problems. We're now seeing some problems that I think were unintended that have popped up, and we have a responsibility to act to make sure that people can stay in their condo units. The legislature should not be doing anything that's going to cause someone to have to flee because of an artificial mandate. And so I think it was a good faith effort. I don't think people had all the answers then. But now we've seen what's happened. My administration, we've been working over the last several months soliciting input. We've held roundtables in different parts of the state. I know the Florida Senate has been soliciting input. So let's get our heads together and let's provide some relief. And then the final addition to the call will be reforming the petition and amendment process in the state of Florida. I mean, this was a major thing in this last election. And to have the amount of fraudulent petitions that were verified as fraudulent by the Secretary of State's investigation for Amendment 4, that is a huge problem. And I think part of the reason we're at this juncture is because the citizen initiative has really been transformed into a special interest initiative. And it's basically major, well-funded interest. They will pay people to gather petitions, and they'll pay them. And so these people have admitted, some of them have admitted to doing fraudulent petitions. And so that we need election integrity across the board. It can't just be, yes, obviously if you're going to cast your ballot, you need ID, you need paper ballots, all that. But these initiatives, these petitions, should not be able to be manipulated this way, especially with respect to amending the Constitution. Our Constitution should not be for sale to the highest bidder. So reform is needed. I think there's broad agreement in the legislature that reform is needed. I think it's timely, because why start another election cycle where you have the old system, and then what? If there's fraud, what are you going to do at that point? It's just it didn't work this last time to adequately police the fraud. We got it. And I think people will be held accountable. I know some have been. I think there'll probably be more prosecutions. But let's just get it right now so we don't have to worry about this going forward. So I look forward to being able to work with the legislature to deliver these really significant issues on behalf of the people of Florida, but we don't have the ability to just sit around and wait with a new president taking office, with these new policy changes that are coming. We've got to get ahead of it. We've got to make sure that we're there as a willing partner with the Trump administration to be able to accomplish what the voters sent President Trump to accomplish. With that, take some questions. Yes.
Talk about the timeline more on why is it important to have this done the last week of January instead of waiting until the first week of March?
Because the policies are going to go into effect the week of the inauguration. And so you can have, and it's not just the first week of March. I mean, some of this stuff wouldn't take effect potentially later if you do it in regular session. That's typically the process. So why would we want to twiddle our thumbs when we know that this is a major initiative? This is probably the most significant initiative, domestic initiative, that the new administration is going to do. So we need to be ready. And everybody who's in law enforcement, state and local, they need to know you have responsibilities to help facilitate this important interest for our country. We'll provide you funding for it, but you got to be on the team here, and I think you need to do that on day one.
What kind of options are you looking for condo reform? I know that was kind of a sticking point between the chambers. They didn't want to go too far. So what is the agreement that you're kind of coming up with?
So here's first of all, I don't think there is an agreement between the chambers, because I think we in my office think something needs to be done. I don't know that the House is there. I think the Senate may be somewhere in between. But what I would say is this: we have a lot of members in both the House and Senate that have constituents. And this is one of the things that the constituents are talking to them about. What role do we have in mandating certain things to be done from the state level? I mean, it's one thing to have transparency so that the condo owners know if there's something wrong with the building, they need to know that. I mean, I don't think very many people are going to, if they thought that the building was in danger of standing, that they would not want to do something about it. But I think this is bringing a lot more than that. And it's saying you should have done this repair, you should have done that repair, which may be true, but the question is, are we going to force these big assessments through legislation, which I think is what's happened. So I think that there just needs to be relief, and you got to be common sense about it, and just be honest that we didn't have all the answers when they did it the first time. Honestly, we still don't have all the answers, even with Surfside. But let's just make sure that we're not leading people to be forced out of their units. And so there's different things you can do with deadlines. You can have the locals take responsibility for ensuring some. There's a whole bunch of different things that have been put out there. But I know the Senate has worked to get some ideas. And I'm confident the legislature will be able to just listen to their constituents. I mean, this is not just like, it's not like this is something that I'm just coming up with. I mean, we're doing this because people have asked us to do it.
You mentioned petition initiative reforms. I don't know how much specifics you may have already at this point in time, but a couple things. First up, I heard there was a concern about getting something on the board before somebody launches another one, and that they technically
right. I mean, so if we're going to do this, then we should just have the cycle go under one set of rules. Why would you want to have part of the cycle under one set of rules and then another under a different set? So it just makes sense, whatever you're going to do it sooner rather than later.
But as a quick follow-up, do you have any, I mean, are you looking at raising you maybe going to the voters and raising the threshold again?
So for this special session, this will be legislative reforms. We're not going to put anything on the ballot. There may be things that would be appropriate to do, but as you know, that's not going to happen until the fall of 2026. So that would not necessarily be time sensitive in a way to justify special session. So this is going to be legislative reform. So one thing we're going to do is we've worked very hard on verifying signatures and ID for absentee ballots. Yet on these petitions, it's a much more lax process. Well, we want to have the same thing, a similar thing where you can send in a petition verified with your ID like you would an absentee ballot. If you want to have someone do it on the street and maybe someone notarizes it so we know. So there are things to ensure the integrity of those signatures, and that would apply to candidate petitions as well. You know, it's kind of been just something that we haven't really talked about with candidate petitions. But these candidates go out and get these signatures, and they're not all valid either. And so the process we have now clearly failed in this last cycle. And the analysis that was done, and obviously there was a case that was filed, was that if you extrapolate that it may not have even had the threshold necessary to qualify for the ballot. There's some dispute about that, but the fact that we've been having that is a huge problem. So making sure that these signatures are verified either through the mail or if someone's bringing it in person is really, really significant. But that wouldn't only apply to the amendments. That would apply to candidate petitions as well. So I think that's something that's really, really significant. The other thing is this has been true every election cycle. 2018, I remember I'm running for governor, and I'd have people come up to me, really, really involved people in our process, political process, and they'd be like, can you help me with these amendments? I don't understand how it's written. What does this do? What does this do? And I'm just thinking to myself, is that the way we really want to govern, where it's whoever can write the most clever language to try to get people to do one or the other? And we saw that on this most recent election. Some of the amendments were written in ways that people that were actually on a policy matter opposed to it, they thought somehow that it was good. And then, so you had to do all this. So from a financial impact statement perspective, how this impacts other rights, and having that so the voter has more information on the ballot, I think is something that would make a lot of sense. Also, the role of the Supreme Court in looking at these summaries, because, the summary, you read the summary on the marijuana one, and look, I mean, it's over, it failed, but that summary would not have told you about the liability protection that they got in the Constitution. And so you have the constitutional text, then you have the summary with the marijuana, and the reality is if you only read the summary, it did not give you the full impact of what that is. So I think there's a lot of things in that, but it'll all be legislative. There's not going to be any change to the Constitution proposed in a special session. I don't know if there's going to be anything that ends up on the ballot. I know some people have asked to do it. I have not necessarily come down one way or another because I think those things are difficult, but that would be something the legislature could mint if they wanted to and have it available for 2026. I think they probably could call a special election. I think they would need a pretty high threshold to be able to do that. What is it?
Higher supermajority to get it on the ballot.
It's higher than 2/3.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but honestly, if we really wanted to look, I think that if you're going to do these initiatives, it should be a standalone election because at least people know that's why they're going. I think what happens is people go to vote for president, they're going down, and they just kind of make a decision, does that sound good or not good? And there's not as much debate as there need to be. Now, there was more debate on these more recently just because the proponents spent almost $275 million between Amendments 3 and 4. That is a huge amount of money.
How much are you asking for the immigration and for my sake?
Excuse me?
How much are you asking for?
So on My Safe Florida Home, I think what I've said is, because I think that the program can be expensive and I don't know how far the legislature is willing to go, but I said at a minimum what we would want is anybody in these hurricane-affected areas who had damage to their home who are approved for My Safe Florida Home, but there's not enough money, let's get them the grants. So that helps when they're rebuilding it. And they need to rebuild anyways. They're approved for the program. This will help keep them hopefully in better shape for next hurricane season if we can do it now. If we wait till July 1st, they're not going to be able to get anything done. That price tag on that is much more manageable than if you just funded the entire thing writ large. So I think we've calculated it. We think it's probably about, $100 million? Do I got any of my budget guys here? We think it's probably about $100 million. To do the approved wait list folks who are in the Milton and Helene affected areas, and I think we should do that sooner rather than later. Look, if the legislature says they don't want to do that anymore, I mean, obviously, I think we should, but it doesn't make sense. If you think we should do it, then just get it done now so these folks get it. And then on the immigration, we're still working on that. I don't think it's not going to break the bank. It's going to be relatively manageable. I mean, I think probably tens of millions of dollars. I don't know if we've put a price tag on it for sure, but it'll be something that's more than manageable with our current fiscal posture, and it will save money. If the Trump administration is successful, it will save us money on the back end, because if you go and look at some of who shows up in police stations and who's getting arrested, I mean, we do have a chunk of them that are in this country illegally. That's just the truth.
And as As far as the immigration enforcement, what do you want to see from local and state officials, and would that apply to schools, for instance? Whatever.
So
the
what it will do is you have a responsibility to work with the federal government and help facilitate the policies. Now, we're going to have to see what the executive orders say exactly. Now, I've been briefed on it, spoken with the president, I've spoken to some of his key staff. My guys are in contact with some of their staff. So we'll tailor what we're doing to mirror what their policies are going to be. But clearly, at a minimum, I think it's, if you look at things like this 287G program, that's typically been a local, like a sheriff can opt into it and then assist the feds. We're going to say, municipalities and counties are going to be a part of 287G. That's going to be a duty imposed by the state. We will, of course, fund it because we can't do unfunded mandates. But people can count on participating in the 287G program. And I think what they're going to do with the Trump administration, I think this is going to be more robust application of 287G than we've probably seen. So that'll be good. It'll be something that I think will make a meaningful difference. Now, when we did the sanctuary city ban, my first year as governor, it was fine. And but what happened is when Biden came in, he made the whole country a sanctuary country. So like you didn't need to be a sanctuary city, right? They weren't deporting anybody or very few compared to what even Obama did way more deportations than what Biden did. So the issue kind of lost a little bit. But now that you have the Trump administration, you are going to see some of these, I think, blue cities around the country are going to absolutely fight. I think California, even though they have massive wildfires and have been huge devastation, they actually brought a special session to fund opposition to Trump's immigration policies. I think they did like $50 million to say that cities can push back. Because in Florida, we're going to be the opposite. You're not going to push back. The federal government has the responsibility to do this, and in order for them to be successful, I do think it's going to require cooperation from state and local. I don't need legislation for the state. I'm just going to tell them to do it. Some of the funding we may need, but honestly, I don't even know that we need that much funding from the state. And the locals are going to need some funding, and I do think they're going to need some legislative prescription.
Two things on the in-state tuition. If I heard you correctly, did you say you wanted that to end immediately? The Senate president was talking about perhaps phasing that out, and then the immigration enforcement money. Would any of that go to extra detention centers and that sort of thing?
Sure. So, and again, this is going to be something that we're going to work with the administration on. What facilities are they going to use for detention? I mean, for example, we work with the Coast Guard to stop the boats, right? And if you stop the boat in the water, they're allowed to just be turned back to Haiti or wherever they're coming from. But if they make it ashore, then all of a sudden it's just this elaborate process. So why not just have something detained, do it, and do it very quickly? I think the feds will probably be leading on that. I think they'll probably use their resources, would be my guess. But if there's things that we can do to be helpful on that, we want to be helpful on that for sure.
Do you envision, when it comes to immigration, utilizing the Florida National Guard or Florida State Guard to kind of support in-state missions?
It could. It depends on the demand signal. I'm very confident that we would have very positive results from both the National Guard and the State Guard. You remember when I proposed re-upping the State Guard, because it wasn't like we just created this. We used to have a State Guard in the state of Florida. So we wanted to reconstitute it, and how that was characterized was a total joke, acting like this is going to be some type of threat to the state. These guys have gone out. I mean, when Helene hit, we had a lot of resources staged in Florida. Fortunately, we did not need to do massive search and rescue compared to what a lot of people thought would need to be done. And so 24 hours into it, 36 hours into it, we had resources. Then you had Western North Carolina. You had parts of Georgia. So we sent to Western North Carolina. So you actually had the Florida State Guard effectuating rescues in Western North Carolina in ways that were really impactful. They did a whole bunch of stuff in Milton as well. So these guys have done really good. It's been a great asset for the state of Florida, and we will use either as appropriate. We also, of course, have Highway Patrol. We have Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We have, I mean, Fish and Wildlife. You know, when you have people coming, we're a little unique because people are coming by boat. The ones that come across the border come in usually through vehicles, and then Biden flew them in and wouldn't tell us about it. I mean, that did happen from time to time as well. So we know that that's going to stop going forward. So I think we've got a lot of tools at our disposal. The key is, though, is we've been told when over Biden, states, you can't enforce immigration. It's a federal responsibility because we've tried to do things in Florida. We did an anti-smuggling bill to say if you're bringing people across the border, you can be held accountable in Florida. And we lost in court because they said this is the exclusive province of the federal government. Okay, well, so what? They have an exclusive province to ignore the law? It's ridiculous. But now you have the federal government saying we're going to enforce the laws on the books. So it can't be the case that that somehow you're not allowed to help enforce the law against the wishes of the federal government when they're not enforcing law. But then when they actually want to enforce the law, states and localities can somehow nullify federal law by being a sanctuary state or sanctuary city. There's no way that doesn't work. So in order to make this work and ensure the laws are upheld, you got to be willing to work constructively with the federal government. We obviously believe in the policy, and we believe that the last 4 years have been bad with respect to the people that have been let into the country. But even if we didn't believe that, if it is the federal government's responsibility and this is an important national policy, I don't see any way that states and localities should be allowed to throw a wrench into that. You need to be there. You need to be facilitating.
Representative Mills told one of my colleagues this morning that he had an excellent call with you and your team yesterday related to several issues that are important to you, including immigration. I don't know if you saw, he kind of said on Saturday that he's interested in running for the Rubio seat, regardless of who you appoint. Just wondering if you could say anything about that.
Well, we're going to make an appointment in very soon. I mean, we have, up until January 20th, where we will not have a vacancy. I anticipate a vacancy occurring on the afternoon of the 20th or no later than the 21st. So we'll have somebody ready to go on that. Look, I mean, people are free to do what they want. I think, generally speaking, if somebody is appointed and does a good job, I don't think that they're going to be somebody that you're going to be able to successfully challenge in a Republican primary. And so people are free to do what they want, but I don't think that would be something that would be the case. And I'm sure if he happened to be appointed, I don't think he would want necessarily someone doing it. But that's fine. So we've talked to a lot of good people. We've got a lot of I think credible candidates and some good candidates. Now, Corey, one of the things we did discuss, he's a member of the House. And, you kind of remember election night, Republicans were giddy. You see Trump win in these swing states. Then kind of the dust settles, and you're like, we lost seats in the U.S. House. How the heck did that happen? And part of it, I mean, California took them 30 days to be able to determine some of those elections, but that just is what it is. But Republicans lost seats. So they have 220 duly elected Republicans. We have Florida, one is vacant, so they started the Congress with 219. On January 20th, you're going to have 217 to 215. And so when you talk about Corey, Kat Kamak, honestly, she's a fighter. She's really, really good, really strong. I think she's got a great record. I spoke with her the other day. But the issue would be, are you going to go from 217 to 216? That's a tough thing. And I've been honest with the Congress people. That's a big concern of mine because one of the criteria I had with who I'm going to appoint is we just had an election. President has a mandate. I want you to help facilitate that. I don't want you to be sand in the gears. I mean, as long as he's focusing on the things he campaigned on, you got to be part of the team and you got to help deliver that. But if you put someone there and then it reduces the numbers in the House, it may make it harder for them to be able to enact an agenda. Because, we're doing an election for two of the seats, but that's not till April 1st. And part of that's just the way between federal and Florida law. If they wanted to do it quicker, what they need to do is maybe just have one election with no primaries. Because when you do the primary, you got 45 days for that, 45 days for the general, just for military absentee overseas. That's not even counting qualifying, all these other things. So they're going to be at 217 on January 20th, which means if all the Dems are no, if they lose one Republican, then they can't. If you had 216, 215 because I appointed someone in the Senate, then if you lose one Republican, then the Dems would actually have a one seat majority. So that's just a big practical concern. It's not anything that any of these guys have any control over. It's not their fault, but that's just the reality that we're dealing with. I don't want to do anything to inhibit getting the agenda accomplished, and even though the appointment is for a Senate, if that ends up impacting what the U.S. House is able to do. And oh, by the way, I mean, if it wasn't for Florida, you would have a Democrat majority in the House right now, as it's just the reality.
Special elections, the ACLU has filed suit against you for not yet scheduling special elections for Randy Fine and Joel Rudman's seats. Do you have a date yet for when you'll make that announcement?
So I wanted to do them the same time as the congressional. The problem is you have the resign to run, and so by the time those letters are submitted, you can't stand up the special election to be the same as those dates. We couldn't get it. They couldn't get it done. So then because you got to give people time to qualify. And if I would have done, they submit their letter during that week. If I just would have demanded date, it wouldn't have ended up adding up properly. So once you know that, you can't physically seat anybody in time for the session to be over at that point. So I think the Secretary of State is working on proposing dates. He's going to talk to, he probably has talked to the respective counties. I guess with Randy Fine, it's just Brevard probably for that. And then I think with Rudman, I think maybe 2 counties, and maybe Okaloosa, Santa Rosa. So we'll do it. But my preference was to have that in the same time. The problem is when you set the congressional, you don't know who's going to end up resigning to run when you do that. If I already knew that, then maybe I could have done it. But you have to wait for that process to play out under Florida law and then do it. Incidentally, on this resign to run, I think it's a ridiculous thing the way it's worked out in Florida. I mean, the idea is, I think, that they want you to focus on the job you got elected to and then not run for anything else while you're supposedly being. The problem is, you don't actually resign until the election's over anyways. So all these guys are campaigning. Rudman's campaigning. These guys are campaigning anyways. And then if they win, obviously they go to the next one. If they lose, then they're out. But by the time they get forced out, they're done with the election anyways. So if you were going to do resign to run, you would say you resign the minute you announce your candidacy, which is not what they've done. So I think they should just chuck the whole thing. I think it's been more expensive for the state as a result of having to do the resign to run. It just hasn't worked. But at a minimum, if you're going to do it, the resignation, you would want it to be effective prior to the campaigning, because I think the reason is you don't want people getting elected. They're supposed to do their job here in the legislature, but then they're out campaigning or whatever. I don't think that actually even works that way, because legislators are up every 2 years, so they're constantly out campaigning. It's not like the campaign really ends. Same thing with members of Congress. But I think this has been a big expense for really no reason for the state of Florida. We could have just said, you guys can do what you want. And look, I mean, it may have triggered special elections if they're successful, and I get that, but to force these special elections is ridiculous. But I would have preferred to do them the same dates. We just physically, you can't do it when you're dealing with resign to run, because I wouldn't have been able to have enough time to qualify. So then the question is, do you try to jam it in a couple weeks later? The session's going to be over at that point. So we've said, give us the dates that you want. I know Court is going to recommend some stuff, and we'll do it. But my preference would have been to do it the same time. It just, resign to run doesn't work that way.
And with immigration, immigrants make up a major source of the workforce for industries like hospitality and tourism.
Well, excuse me though. You said immigrants make up. Yes, we have legal immigrants in Florida. So you can't conflate illegal immigrants with people who are here legally. Now, I've also said we've got some big problems with some of the legal immigration programs that we have. I mean, we've seen this H-1B program, how companies will bring in H-1B, the Americans train the H-1B, and then they fire the Americans and hire the H-1B. How would that even remotely be acceptable? You have chain migration, which is not merit-based and is bringing in more distant relatives. Not what you want. So there's a whole host of issues there that need major reform. But from an immigration enforcement perspective, mean, if somebody is here on like an H-2A visa, they are working in the state of Florida legally. And when we did E-Verify, people would say, we had E-Verify enacted, they'd say, hey, there's a busload of farm workers. I saw them on I-4. And people assume they're illegal. And then FDLE looks, they all had the H-2A visas. And so there's no enforcement if somebody is here on valid reasons. Now, it doesn't prevent us or Congress and people like me from just using my platform to say, hey, you may need to look at how we're doing legal immigration in this country, because it's not America first the way it's going. But we do have, I think we probably have the highest foreign-born population in the country of any state. Certainly we're in the top 5 for sure. And yet, I would point out, I came in, we did sanctuary city ban. People say, oh, you can't do that. You know, we have. It was the people, the first generation, they wanted the sanctuary city ban. When we did the legal transports to things like Martha's Vineyard, people said, oh, the Venezuelans in Miami aren't going to like that, because I guess a lot of the people that got transported to Venezuela. I go down there, these guys are high-fiving me because they think Maduro's sending undesirables to the country. So this whole idea that somehow people that are first generation do not want to see immigration enforcement, that is totally not the case. And just look at the election results in Miami-Dade County. We were, 8 years ago? We had Hillary winning by 30 points. I carried it by double digits 2 years ago. Donald Trump carried it by double digits, and we both ran strong on immigration. So don't conflate the two. Immigration enforcement is focusing on illegal aliens that are in the country, in our state. Legal immigrants obviously have a right to be here. They're following the process. Now, that should not mean that someone here is H-1B. Of course, they're not going to be sent. But if there's fraud and if these programs should be reformed, they do need to be reformed. But I would not conflate the two. I think that, and I think the media oftentimes, they try to frame it as if somehow somebody comes, they apply, they come to the United States, they're doing good. And it's like, oh, you know, they're going to enforce against, quote, immigrants. No, they're going to enforce against illegal aliens. And that's really what we're talking about. So week of January 27th, I know that there's a lot of rank and file members of both the House and Senate that are chomping at the bit to be able to weigh in and make sure that Florida is leading the way in the states to help the incoming Trump administration accomplish their objectives. There's a whole host of other areas I think we're going to be working with. I mean, a lot of it is going to be, they're going to be empowering us to do more and more, whereas we usually had to overcome the Biden administration. I think you're going to see more and more responsibility provided to the states. I mean, I mentioned last week, give me the stuff for Everglades restoration for federal. We can do it much quicker than the Army Corps can do. We have a massive reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee. We want to make sure we do. Block grant the money. Give us the authority. We'll get it done. Higher education. Make sure we overhaul accreditation. The Department of Education federally has got to approve that. We're ready to go on that. We know there needs to be. So there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to be empowering us to do, but this is one key example where we can help facilitate a key objective, not only for the incoming administration, but for our country. We got to get this issue right. We've been talking about it for decades and decades. Now's the time. President Trump has a mandate. State of Florida is going to be there working every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope to do more of these this coming years.
You got this nice room, right?
I know, so you got to use it.